Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time, we're looking at a company called Nebius Group, which is an AI company that's been making some waves lately. And we're going to try to figure out why everybody's talking about them. So the main thing we're going to be looking at today is a Motley Fool article that highlights a pretty bold prediction, I guess you could say, by Citron Research, they think. Nebius could actually double its stock price.
Yeah, it's really quite interesting,
Sounds
because this prediction actually came out on the same day as a pretty big announcement from Nvidia. Nvidia, the big AI chip maker. Well, they just invested $700 million, a lot of money, into Nebius.
Wow. So you have to wonder, right? Like, is that just a total coincidence?
Yeah.
Or is there something more to it? I guess let's just start with, like, the basics. What is Nebius Group? Like, what do they actually do? Are they, like, the brains behind the next, like, big viral AI app?
Well, not quite. Nebius is in the business of what's called AI infrastructure. So they're providing all the, like, computing power and the tools that other companies need to develop their own AI applications.
Oh, okay. So they're not creating the flashy AI that we see, but they're the ones who are, like, providing the power for other companies to do that.
Exactly. Think of them as, like, providing the building blocks for this whole AI revolution that's going on.
Okay, that makes sense. But this is where the story gets a little bit interesting, maybe. Nebius wasn't always its own company. It was actually spun off from a Russian search giant called Yandex, and this just happened this year.
Yeah, that's right. So the whole conflict in Ukraine and the sanctions that followed kind of led to the separation of the two companies.
Yeah, so Nebius has got this pretty unique backstory, I guess you could say. And I'm sure some of our listeners thinking, okay, like, red flag, right? Russian connection. Should I be worried about that?
Yeah, it's certainly a unique aspect of their history. But you have to remember, Nebius is a completely independent entity now. They're operating on a global scale.
So, as an investor, should I be focusing on, like, their technology and their potential more so than those, like, past ties?
Precisely. And speaking of potential, Citron Research is drawing some interesting comparisons between Nebius and another AI infrastructure company called CoreWeave.
Okay. I've heard of CoreWeaves. They're the ones that are rumored to be going for this huge IPO, right?
Right.
And an IPO is basically, just to remind everyone, that's when a private company goes public and offers shares of its stock to the general public for the first time.
Exactly. And it can be a big deal for both the company and for investors who are, like, trying to get in early.
Right. So Citron is basically saying Nebius is doing similar things as CoreWeave. They've got the backing of Nvidia, but their stock price hasn't really caught up yet.
Exactly. And that's kind of their whole argument, They're saying that Nebius is undervalued compared to CoreWeave.
Okay.
And they even went as far as to say that if Nebius was valued similarly, their stock could reach $60 a share.
$60.
Which is more than double its current price.
Wow. That's a lot of potential upside there. But I guess the question is, like, what's fueling that optimism, right? What are their actual, like, plans? What's Nebius saying that they're going to do?
Well, they're setting some pretty ambitious goals. They're projecting a 200 to 300% increase in revenue by 2025.
Wow, that's a lot.
Which is huge.
Yeah.
They're also planning some major data center expansions in Europe, specifically in Finland and France, and then also in North America.
Okay, so they're, like, putting their money where their mouth is. Sounds like it. But what about, like, the financial nitty-gritty? Where do they stand right now in terms of profitability?
So as of right now, they're not actually profitable yet.
Okay.
They do have a very strong cash position. They've got about $2.3 billion in cash.
Wow.
And very little debt.
Okay.
So this gives them a really solid foundation for future growth.
Right, so they've got the resources to pursue those ambitious plans, but they haven't quite turned a profit yet. That's an important thing to remember. As an investor...
Absolutely. And there's actually another kind of layer to this whole story involving Citron Research. That adds another dimension to their prediction.
Oh, this is where it gets even more interesting. What's the twist?
Well, Citron Research is known for being a short seller.
Wait a second. The same people who are predicting that Nebius is going to, like, double in price are known for betting against companies. I don't understand that. Can you, like, explain what short selling is?
Sure, yeah. Short selling is basically when you borrow shares of a stock that you think is going to go down in price. You sell them at the current price, and then you hope to buy them back later at a lower price to return to the lender.
So you're basically profiting from a company doing badly.
Exactly.
Okay, so it seems kind of counterintuitive that a known short seller would be so bullish on Nebius.
Yeah, it might seem that way, but you have to remember, short sellers actually play an important role in the market. They do a lot of research. They try to identify companies that they believe are overvalued, and that can be valuable information for all investors.
Right, so their expertise is in finding like the weaknesses in companies.
Exactly.
And the fact that they're actually recommending Nebius means that they see like real strength in this company.
Exactly.
Okay, so their shift in stance is actually a powerful signal.
Yeah, and to prove their seriousness, Citron actually recently shorted MicroStrategy, which is a company that they had previously recommended.
Oh, wow.
So they're willing to put their money where their mouth is and change their position based on their analysis.
So that adds a lot of credibility to their Nebius prediction.
Absolutely.
Okay, so for anyone out there who is new to AI stocks, this might be like a lot to take in. We've thrown a lot of information at you already.
Yeah, it's definitely a fast-growing field, and it can be exciting to invest in, but there's definitely some complexities involved.
For sure. So we've talked about Nebius's unique backstory. We've talked about their ambitious plans and their financial standing. But I think the question on everyone's mind is Nebius Group really worth the investment?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, there's no easy answer.
Right. We've talked about the potential, but there are also risks to consider. So what are some of the potential downsides or red flags that our listeners should be aware of?
Well, I think the first thing to remember is they're not profitable yet. I mean, we mentioned those impressive revenue projections, but they're still operating in the red. So investors are going to be watching very closely to see how they progress towards actually making a profit.
Okay, that's a good point. Anything else? Anything else flashing on your radar?
Yeah, I think. Another concern is the competitive landscape. This AI infrastructure market, it's becoming really competitive. There's a lot of companies vying for a piece of the pie.
Right.
So Nebius really needs to stay ahead of the curve to maintain their position.
It's a high-stakes race.
It is.
Any other potential challenges you think they might face?
Well, I think their spinoff from the index,
Yeah.
while it was necessary, it could still pose some challenges. There might be some lingering perceptions or associations.
They're a former parent company, especially given the current geopolitical climate.
Right.
And that might make some investors hesitant.
Yeah, the Russian connection is like a double-edged sword. Adds to their story. But it could also create some uncertainty.
Finally, I think it's just important to remember that the AI industry as a whole is still in its early stages. There's still a lot of uncertainty about how things are going to unfold in the long term.
So investing in Nebius or any AI company requires a healthy dose of caution.
For sure.
A long-term perspective.
Absolutely. Thorough research is key. A clear understanding of the risks.
So we've given you a lot to consider today. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. What are the ethical implications of investing in a company like Nebius, a company that's playing a key role in the rapid advancement of AI? Ooh, that's a really important question. And it's one that I think every investor needs to grapple with.
Yeah. As AI becomes more powerful, we need to think critically about its impact on society as a whole, both positive and potentially negative.
Exactly.
It's a complex conversation that goes beyond just the realm of investing.
For sure.
But as you weigh your options, I encourage you to take a moment to consider that bigger picture. Think about the future you envision and how AI might shape that future.
It's an evolving landscape.
Yeah.
That deserves careful consideration.
Absolutely. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those weighty questions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Nebius Group. Keep an eye on this company. Their story is just beginning. We'll be right back after a short break.
Yeah, we'll be diving into even more details about Nebius and the ethical considerations of AI. So stay tuned. Yeah, it's a really fascinating question to think about. With AI advancing so rapidly, we really need to be mindful of how it might impact society in both good ways and maybe some not so good ways.
That's a really good point. I think it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of, a booming market and a company like Nebius that has so much potential, but we can't lose sight of those bigger picture questions. So what are some of the ethical concerns that come to mind when you think about this?
Well, one area that people talk about a lot is, the potential for AI to actually make existing inequalities even worse.
Yeah.
Like if access to AI technology and all the benefits that come with it are concentrated in the hands of just a few, it could really widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. And we've already seen how technology can create those divides. So AI could really amplify that if we're not careful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole issue of job displacement. As AI gets more sophisticated, it's likely to start automating tasks that are currently being done by humans, and that could lead to job losses in certain sectors, which could have huge social and economic consequences.
Right. And that's something that policymakers and industry leaders need to be thinking about now. Like, how do we make sure that the benefits of AI are shared broadly and that people who are displaced by automation have opportunities to adapt and learn new skills and thrive in this new environment?
It's a tough challenge, for sure, but it's one we need to face head on. Another ethical concern is the potential for AI systems to be biased. AI algorithms are trained on data, and if that data reflects existing biases, then the AI system is just going to perpetuate and maybe even amplify those biases.
That's so true. We've already seen examples of AI systems that are biased, whether it's facial recognition technology or loan approval algorithms. So it's really important that we develop AI systems that are fair and unbiased and accountable.
Absolutely. And there's this whole question of transparency and explainability. As AI systems get more and more complex, it can be hard to understand how they're actually making decisions. And this lack of transparency can be a problem because it raises concerns about accountability and trust, especially when AI is being used in sensitive areas like healthcare or criminal justice.
Yeah, that makes sense. If we're going to trust these AI systems to make big decisions, we need to be able to understand how they're getting to those decisions.
Right.
So it seems like there's just a lot to think about when it comes to the ethical implications of AI. It's not just about the technology itself, but it's about how it's developed and how it's deployed and how it's governed.
Yeah, it's a multifaceted issue that requires everyone to really think carefully about it.
So as we think about investing in Nebius or any other company that's involved in AI, we need to keep these ethical dimensions in mind. It's not just about, how much money we can make. It's about what kind of future we're creating through our investments.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We have a responsibility to think about the potential consequences of our actions and to make sure that AI is used in a way that benefits everyone.
I think those are really important words to reflect on. It's so easy to get caught up in the hype and the potential for profit. But we need to approach AI with a sense of responsibility and a commitment to ethical principles.
Yeah, the future of AI depends on it.
Okay, so let's bring it back to Nebius specifically. We've talked about these broader ethical implications of AI. Are there any ethical considerations that are specific to Nebius and their role in this AI infrastructure market?
Yeah, I think one thing to consider is the environmental impact of their operations. AI infrastructure requires a lot of energy to power all those data centers and computing systems. So as Nebius grows, it's important to think about whether that growth is sustainable from an environmental perspective.
That's a good point. The energy consumption of data centers is a big concern these days, and companies like Nebius have a responsibility to minimize their footprint. So what are they doing to address that?
Well, from what I've seen, they're committed to using renewable energy sources for their data centers, and they're also implementing energy-efficient technologies and practices to reduce their overall energy use.
Okay, so it sounds like they're taking some steps in the right direction.
Yeah, and it's good that they're being transparent about their efforts and showing that they're committed to responsible environmental practices.
For sure. Another ethical consideration specific to Nebius is their recent split from Yandex, the Russian search giant, given the current geopolitical situation and all the sanctions against Russia. Some investors might be a little uneasy about Nebius's past ties to a Russian company.
Yeah, I can see why some investors might be hesitant. But I think it's important to remember that Nebius is a separate entity now, and they're operating under the laws and regulations of the countries where they do business.
So investors should focus on Nebius's current operations and their future plans and not get too hung up on their past affiliations.
Exactly. Do your research, look at their financials, understand their business model, and make an informed decision based on those factors.
Good advice. Okay, so we've talked about the environmental impact and their Russian connection. Are there any other ethical concerns specific to Nebius that we should be thinking about?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is the potential for their technology to be used for purposes that could have negative consequences for society. Their AI infrastructure could be used to develop surveillance technologies that invade people's privacy or autonomous weapon systems, which raise all sorts of ethical red flags.
Those are some scary possibilities. So it sounds like it's really important for companies like Nebius to be very careful about how their technology is used and to put safeguards in place to prevent misuse. Do they have any policies to address those concerns?
Well, they've said publicly that they're committed to responsible AI development, and they've stated that they won't knowingly provide their technology to customers who are going to use it for harmful or unethical purposes.
That's a good start, but it also highlights how challenging it is to control a technology that has so many potential applications. It's an ongoing conversation, and it requires everyone to be vigilant.
Exactly. It's a complex landscape, and there are no easy answers. But it's a conversation that needs to happen as AI keeps evolving and becomes more and more a part of our lives.
Okay, so we've talked about the ethical considerations. Let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the financial side of things we've discussed. Nebius's impressive revenue projections, but we know they're not profitable yet. So what are some of the key financial metrics that investors should be paying attention to when they're evaluating Nebius?
Well, one important metric is their gross margin. This measures how profitable their core business operations are, taking into account the cost of providing their services. A healthy gross margin means that they're pricing their services well and managing their costs effectively.
Okay, so a strong gross margin is a good indicator of the company's financial health.
Right. And another important metric is their operating expenses. These are the costs associated with running the business. Things like salaries, marketing, research, and development. Investors should look at how those operating expenses are trending relative to revenue growth. If operating expenses are growing faster than revenue, that could be a sign that they're not managing their spending very well.
So it's important to look at how much they're spending and make sure that their spending is in line with their revenue growth.
Exactly. And another thing to keep an eye on is their cash flow. This is basically the lifeblood of any business. They need to generate enough cash to cover their operating expenses, invest in growth, and pay off any debts they might have.
So even though revenue growth is important, it's also important to make sure that they're actually generating enough cash to support their operations and their future plans.
Right. A strong cash flow position gives them more flexibility and stability,
right,
which is especially important for a young company like Nebius that's still growing.
Okay, so we've got gross margin, operating expenses, cash flow. Those are all important things for investors to consider. It's not just about looking at the top-line revenue numbers, but digging a little deeper and understanding the financial health of the company.
Exactly. A thorough analysis of their financial statements will give investors a much clearer picture of how the company's performing, what the risks are, and whether they're sustainable in the long term.
So don't be afraid to get into those financial statements and do some research. There are resources available to help you understand them and make sense of the numbers.
Exactly. There are lots of websites and publications that can help you navigate the financial side of things.
All right, so we've covered the ethical considerations. We've talked about the financials now. Let's talk a little bit about Nebius's competition. We mentioned earlier that the AI infrastructure market is getting more and more competitive. Who are some of the big players that Nebius is up against?
Well, one of the major players is Amazon Web Services, or AWS. They're a giant in the cloud computing space, and they offer a wide range of AI infrastructure services, including computing power, storage, and machine learning tools.
Yeah, AWS is a tough competitor. They have a huge global reach, and they've been doing cloud computing for a long time. Who else is out there?
Another big one is Microsoft Azure. That's Microsoft's cloud computing platform. And they also offer a whole suite of AI infrastructure services. They've been growing really quickly.
So Nebius is going up against some of the biggest names in tech. What do they have that those giants don't? What are their competitive advantages?
Well, one of Nebius's strengths is their focus on high-performance computing, which is crucial for AI workloads that need a lot of processing power. They've built a reputation for having really cutting-edge hardware and software that's specifically designed for AI applications.
So they're targeting companies that are really pushing the limits of AI development, the ones that need the most powerful infrastructure available.
Exactly. And another advantage is their partnership with Nvidia, the leading AI chip maker. This partnership gives them access to the latest and greatest GPU technology, which is essential for training and running AI models.
That's huge. Having Nvidia on their side is a big plus. What other strengths do they have?
Well, they're also known for having a really customer-centric approach. They have a reputation for providing excellent technical support, and they work closely with their customers to make sure they're getting the most out of their AI systems.
So it's not just about the technology itself, it's about the service and the expertise they provide.
Exactly. Building strong relationships with their customers is really important for them. And finally, I think their recent separation from Yandex could actually be a competitive advantage. It gives them the freedom to operate independently and focus entirely on the AI infrastructure market, without any distractions or conflicts of interest.
So their independence could be a strength, allowing them to move quickly and adapt to the rapidly changing AI landscape. It sounds like Nebius has a lot going for them, but they're definitely facing some tough competition. It'll be interesting to see how they handle this market in the next few years.
Yeah, the AI infrastructure market is still evolving, and there's a lot of room for growth and innovation. It's definitely a space to watch.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about Nebius's origins, their ambitious plans, their financial situation, the ethical considerations around AI and the competitive landscape they're facing. But there's one last piece of the puzzle I want to explore, and that's you, the listener. So given everything we've learned about Nebius, would you personally invest in them?
Well, that's a tough one. Honestly, it's really a question that every individual listener has to answer for themselves based on, their own personal circumstances. And there's no right or wrong answer here. It really comes down to your risk tolerance, your investment goals, and how much you believe in Nebius and their ability to achieve their vision.
Right, we've seen they have a lot of positives, like the AI market is booming. They've got Nvidia backing them. Their plans for growth are very ambitious, but we also have to acknowledge those risks. Their lack of profitability, the very competitive market they're in.
Weighing those factors carefully is key, and it might be helpful to think back to the dot-com boom. Way back in the early days of the internet, there were so many companies popping up, all trying to grab a piece of the pie.
Right.
And a lot of them didn't survive.
Right.
But the ones that did,
became huge.
Became incredibly successful.
Like your Amazons and Googles and Facebooks all came out of that period of intense innovation and some failures along the way.
Yeah, and I'm not saying Nebius is going to be the next Amazon or anything like that.
Right.
But the point is, investing in emerging technologies always carries some level of risk. Yeah. You're basically placing a bet on a company's ability to adapt and change and ultimately succeed in a very dynamic and unpredictable market.
So no crystal ball.
No guarantees.
No guarantees. All right, so for those out there who are intrigued by Nebius and thinking about maybe dipping their toes into AI investing for the first time, what advice would you give them?
Well, first and foremost, I would say do your research go beyond just the headlines and the predictions. Really dig deep into their financial statements, read those investor presentations, make sure you understand their business model, and research their competitors.
So knowledge is power, basically.
Exactly. Make informed decisions based on solid research and not just on hype.
Okay, that's good advice. What else should they keep in mind?
Think about your own investment timeline and your risk tolerance. Are you in this for the long haul? Are you okay with some ups and downs along the way? Or are you looking for a quick return with very little risk? Nebius, as a young and rapidly growing company, might be better suited for investors who have a longer-term perspective.
So this isn't like a get-rich-quick scheme?
Not at all.
This is more like planting a seed and letting it grow.
Yeah, exactly.
Knowing it could take a while to see those big returns.
And finally, remember diversification. Never put all your eggs in one basket, no matter how promising a company might seem. Spread your investments across different companies, different sectors, to minimize that risk.
Don't put all your chips on one number.
Exactly.
Spread them around the table. So we've given everyone a lot to chew on today, from Nebius's journey to the stock market to their potential in this exciting AI world. We even got into the nitty-gritty of short selling and all the ethical questions swirling around AI.
Yeah, it's been a real deep dive.
It really has. But remember, this is just the beginning for Nebius and for the whole AI revolution. This is just getting started. So keep learning, keep asking those questions, and keep exploring. That's what we're all about here on The Deep Dive. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.